About 3 million women in the U.S. are living with breast cancer, and 75% of them are married. But there are few resources that reflect the emotional, physical, and financial impact of the disease on their husbands. When Your Wife Has Breast Cancer is based on the experience of Mark Weiss, whose wife, Kathy, was diagnosed with breast cancer 3 years ago. Mark and Kathy Weiss, good morning to you both. Kathy, obviously you're here. You had a complete mastectomy. You were diagnosed in 2002. And you've recovered. You're doing well now?
I'm doing pretty well. Baby steps.
Baby steps.
Baby steps. 3 years, bumpy roads, but I'm here. I'm great, thanks.
Great news, great news. And Mark, I know that you wrote this book because you really felt you were going through a lot, but there weren't a lot of resources out there for husbands who were going through what you were going through. And I know this was partly a love story, but as well as your need to kind of deal with your own emotions, but also be able to offer some advice, some information for people who might be in your shoes, right?
Natalie, that's exactly correct. You know, I was in my office working 100 miles an hour, and Kathy called out of nowhere and said, Mark, I have a tumor on my breast. I have a malignant tumor. I have breast cancer. What do we do? And all I wanted to do was help my wife, help my kids get through what I knew was going to be a very, very difficult ordeal. And unfortunately, there were no resources out there for a husband as a caregiver to support their family. So based on what we learned, and we learned some lessons the hard way, you know, I wrote a book, and I think this book will help people who are now facing what we had to face a few years ago.
And I know the first chapter of the book, you deal with not only the diagnosis and how you both reacted and responded, but as well as a lot of the information gathering that you felt you had to do. I mean, you really made sure that you interviewed surgeons, that you really knew what you were getting involved with in order to battle this disease. How important is it to be an advocate for yourself in trying to beat cancer, breast cancer?
It's the most important aspect of being, quote-unquote, a good patient. I didn't really understand much about cancer. I certainly didn't understand how breasts worked. And you're talking to surgeons, you're talking to doctors, and you're at a tremendous informational disadvantage. And, you know, under tremendous pressure, we had to educate ourselves as to what we should expect, what our goals should be, what sort of outcome we should try to achieve in battling this disease.
And everything from fighting HMOs, the insurance companies, I mean, really trying to get your best resources, and as well as, I know you had the emotional side of it. You have 2 young sons that, you know, you had to break the news to them. And I know it was very important to you to tell your sons because your own mother had breast cancer and never told you as a young child, and she survived.
Right.
How difficult was that? Because you describe part of the book where Kathy is dealing with her first round of chemotherapy, and how difficult it was to know she's getting sick in the middle of the night and trying to shield the boys from that, but also be as forthcoming with them.
Well, that was the hardest part of all this because we wanted to protect our children. You know, our little Brandon and Ryan, you know, we had to explain to them that mommy's sick, it's curable, we're going to give her a medicine that's going to make her sicker. You didn't get her sick, it's not contagious, and it's going to get her better. That's pretty confusing stuff for an adult.
How are the boys doing? How did they handle it, Kathy?
Well, my youngest son, who was 3 at the time, really had a very hard time because it was the beginning of his life in nursery school, and I basically got up and left his life for 3 years. And it was really hard, and it's still hard on Ryan today. Brandon, who's older, understood it clearly, and he's doing really well. He's doing well.
That's great to hear. And one of the other things as well that I want to mention, Mark, I know you talk about Kathy's struggles with the illness, but as well as your own struggles from concerns about intimate relations, Kathy losing her breasts, obviously, the effects of chemotherapy. You wrote in a portion of the book, I needed to believe that I would wake up one day and it would all be over and that Kathy would be as good as new. Upon reflection, my own shallow needs were fueled in part by my own sense of narcissism, as I was acutely aware of how pleasing it was for me to be with a beautiful wife. I know that had to be very hard for you to write that because it is very honest.
You know, it's honest, and I use denial as a way of getting through this. That, you know, things are going to be fine, we're going to get through this. And I feel a little bit validated because my wife is back, and she's as beautiful and as vibrant as ever.
And do you hope other husbands, are you trying to give them that message of courage and getting through this? Is that what you want them to?
It doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, your wife's not going to come through this, and she can come through this better than ever, and your marriage can be better. So we were fortunate, because it doesn't always have a happy outcome, and so far our outcome is good. But it doesn't necessarily mean that life is going to go south on people. In fact, it can get better.
I also think that Mark's ability to write like that and to be honest, it's a real story with real questions that lots of significant others have.
Right.
He just had, you know, the opportunity to put them out there, and I think a lot of people that are going to read this are going to also identify and say, God, you know, I was wondering that too. It does come off as a little being shallow, but it's really truthful.
Well, Kathy Weiss, we are so glad you're doing well, and Mark Weiss, again, thank you so much for sharing your book with us as well.
Thank you.
And we'll be back in a moment. This is Today on NBC.